What up? It's your boy T-Burn Reaction. Today's music money, so my chair being funny. And we about to check out a look at the latest video from the homie Luke L Train of Luke Kitchen as well too. This is taking a look at one of the most iconic hip hop sampler that changed the game hip hop. That was more around the late '80s to early to mid '90s, as well as currently as well too. Well, that's none other than the SP-1200. The SP-1200 shaped the game with hip hop. What there is for especially for only 10 seconds as well too. A lot of well-known producers as Pete Rock, DJ Premier at one point, and Dr. Dre and many others has used this awesome equipment that shaped the sounds of that late hip hop of the mid late 80s to the early to mid 90s to even some late 90s as well as some later years as well too for those into boom bap. And currently, whether it's the original SP-1200, the Roslyn remake, as well as the electronic one called SP or ESP, spelled ESPI. So anyway, we're gonna take a look at how 10 seconds changed hip hop from Luke Kitchen. Let's get it.
There have been plenty of machines that have helped shape the sound of hip hop. But few defined an entire era like the EMU SP-1200, built by a small synth company in California and limited to just 10 seconds of sample time. It became the backbone of the golden age of hip-hop, used by everyone from Large Professor to Q-Tip to Pete Rock. But how did a company that started out building modular synths end up being one of the most iconic samplers of all time? To understand that, we need to rewind to California in the 50s. Dave Rossum, co-founder of EMU Systems, grew up in San Francisco in the 50s, but he didn't grow up in a particularly musical household.
I grew up in this interesting relationship with music that I wanted my dad's love and he didn't like music. Dad had been brought up believing that the reason that he didn't have a father in his household when he grew up was that his father was a musician and a drummer. Later on, Dad learned that it was because he was two-timing my grandmother and had 3 children by another woman.
Like his father, Rossum was originally drawn to the world of science and decided to attend UC Santa Cruz.
I came planning to major in chemistry and got interested in biology, specifically wanting to use computers. When my graduate advisor at UC Santa Cruz introduced me to the Moog Model 12, it just clicked and dropped out of grad school to design synthesizers because it was so interesting.
The Moog Model 12 was one of the early modular synthesizers.
The Woo!
It was that mix of circuitry and sound that first piqued his
nice.
interest.
He's responsible for the infamous Moog machine first. Nice.
Soon after, he launched his own company in that same space, EMU Systems.
In November 1972, we became an official business and we started putting together the pieces of our first product, which was a modular synthesizer, a cross between a grand piano and a telephone switchboard.
That first piece of gear was the EMU modular system released in 1973. And although this was technology first, the goal was always innovation for artists.
What I really love to do is create new sounds. My synthesizer design really has been about
one was one instrument that Stevie Wonder used. You know, he really
finding tools so that musicians have things that sound new and intriguing to add to their palette of sonic experiences.
Now, as good as those early modular synths were, there was one problem. They could only play one note at a time.
Thinking about this problem of only playing one note at a time. So this meant that the keyboard had to control several channels of synthesizer. That required some digital chips.
By solving the polyphony problem with digital control circuitry, they helped make multi-voice keyboards possible, and other companies quickly took notice.
We started licensing the technology to some other folks, Sequential Circuits, Oberheim, each of whom brought their own technologies and mixed it with ours.
One of those was synth designer Dave Smith.
When he got the brainstorm that became the Prophet 5, he came to us, we introduced him to these chips that we designed. We did this all up front for him for free, and the agreement was that he'd pay us a $75 royalty on the $5,000 instrument. When his instrument took off, we were getting some very nice royalty checks.
The Prophet 5 became one of the most iconic synthesizers ever built. And then, at a trade show, Rossum saw something new. A machine that didn't just generate sound, it allowed you to capture it. The Fairlight CMI.
At the Audio Engineering Society convention, we've seen 2 new products. One was called the Fairlight CMI, Computer Music Instrument. The one thing it did that everybody seemed to like was that you could record a sound and play that sound back and shift its pitch on the keyboard.
This was a radical idea at the time. Capture a real sound, map it across a keyboard, and then play it like an instrument. But it came at a price.
The Fairlight was one of the very first machines that attempted to do digital synthesis, and most of what they
said just wasn't very interesting sonically, but people were excited about this idea of sampling. But the Fairlight cost $35,000 in thinking about what could our next
Probably why a
instrument
lot of people made it homemade with cooking the computer up to a PC like they did on the dude,
I realized
Fame
that
did.
I had a way
Blew up his audition,
electronically
but
of being
still got
able to
in.
compress their design very substantially in terms of the hardware and therefore the cost. And the Emulator 1 was
That's a
born
lot. You gotta do the solder the sound, get them little chips, and they got solder in. That's a lot.
out of that.
The emulator kept the core idea of the Fairlight, but rebuilt it at 8-bit resolution, lower fidelity, less memory, but dramatically cheaper. And whilst making the product, EMU knew they were onto something.
I remember the day. It was in December of 1980 when we first sampled a violin into the Emulator 1. I had gone out to buy lunch for folks just as they were putting in the sample, and I came back, and the smiles on Ed Rudnick and Scott Wedge's and Marco Alpert's faces, that was the day that we realized that sampling really was going to change music.
And change music it did. Within a year, the Emulator was appearing on records like Thriller, the biggest album on the planet. Michael Boddicker, who played it on the album, had this to say of it featuring on Billie Jean, Human Nature, and PYT.
Nice.
It sounds multi-tracked, but it's a single-track sample of Michael Jackson's voice, done in an EMU Emulator 1. We then used this mode the Emulator had where you could sample the sound twice, then detune one of the voices while in unison mode.
Nice. Nice. Wow.
Not content on the success of the emulator, EMU set out to work on its successor, the Emulator 2.
The Emulator 2 is what really caused sampling to take off. The Emulator 2 had a much more sophisticated way to loop that could make sounds much more natural. And then it also had this whole analog synthesizer back end so that you could now filter and envelope that sound. And that's
big
what
floppy
moved
disk drive.
sampling from just being I press a button and the sound comes out to I actually can play and sculpt and perform with the musical notes.
Throughout the 80s, it became a fixture in studios around the world, used by artists like Stevie Wonder,
of course,
Herbie Hancock, and David Bowie. However, arguably its most well-known use was in the iconic scene from Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Oh.
Hi.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God.
So that's what he was using. Okay, I always wonder that. I always remember that. I remember that. Yeah.
Is it serious?
I don't know. I hope not.
By shrinking the Fairlight's core idea
Never knew
to
that was-
something affordable, EMU had found its lane. Now they were ready to apply that same philosophy to drum machines. Their first move into the drum machine market was the Drumulator, designed to undercut Roger Lynn's LM1.
I learned the idea when I was at Caltech. Something called microprogramming would enable me to cut the cost of Roger Lynn's Lynn drum. The LM1 was over $3,000.
I wonder that's why Roger Lynn brought the MPC, because they was trying to get him.
The Drumulator came out at $995.
The Drumulator wasn't revolutionary because of its sound. It was revolutionary because of its price. However, unlike the emulator, these early drum machines didn't allow user sampling. You were limited to only the factory sounds. So when it came to redesign it, one feature was non-negotiable: user sampling.
We wanted an upgrade in fidelity from the Drumulator. We chose the 12-bit format because you couldn't afford to go to full 16 bits back then. Just those converters were just too expensive. And then the user sampling feature was the thing that we knew we wanted in there, and that came out as the SP-12.
12-bit wasn't initially chosen for character. It was mainly about the cost. That compromise would, however, go on to define the sound as producer Ski Beats remembers. The strength of the SP was definitely the way the 12-bit sounded when you threw the sample or the snare or the kick in there. It just sounded so dirty. What sounded like a compromise to engineers sounded like character to those making the music. And when producers discovered it, they quickly realized what it could do.
The SP-12 was like a gift to me, because at that time the technology was so primitive. It was like, wow. They got a box where you could take the record and do what you want with it.
As revolutionary as it may have seemed at the time, there were still huge limitations.
The SP-12 only had 1.2 seconds of sampling. I was able to take 1.2 because I chopped. I was able to make it sound like I had a full loop in there.
Take ultramagnetic MC's
Really?
Ego Tripping.
Nice. And I think like the trick was like same with the the 1200 is they they speed the sample up and then slowed it down when you record it.
Drum
So
loop
they can do it
comes
quicker.
from Melvin Bliss's synthetic substitution.
Of course, those icon drum loop of all time.
But you couldn't just take the loop whole. You had to chop it into fragments and replay it by hand.
The limitations on the SP-12 made me make records like that. Made me chop up kicks and snares. I couldn't take whole loops. I'm thinking maybe
that's why
if I didn't have that
but still like
limitation,
doom
would I
doom
have
like
stumbled
okay.
upon
So it
something?
wasn't like, but this was like quicker than so they had to do doom 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 doom. Like they had to play along with the beat.
In the way I did.
Back in California, though, the engineers had no idea what was happening with this new sound.
I remember hearing about this form of music called hip hop, and I'm white bread. I have no clue what that meant. The SP-12, it's getting really big into hip hop, and me, and particularly my partner Scott Wedge. Okay, what's hip hop? Let's go check out hip hop.
But although not initially designed for hip hop, early innovators like Sed G, Marley Marl, and Paul C all embraced it.
We had to take instruments that weren't designed for hip hop and make them hip hop. Them SP-12s and people who invented those things in 808s had no idea that kids from the street were going to be banging into them like rocking parties with them.
All right, quick break before we carry on with the story. One of the things that made machines like the SP-1200 so powerful wasn't just the hardware, it was the material going into them. A lot of producers were digging for old soul and jazz records, looking for sounds they could flip and reshape. Our Loop Kitchen sample packs are inspired by those exact sounds. And here's a beat we made with a sample from one of our packs.
He got the slab. Oh snap! Yeah, well, he had to. He got the Serato. He might as well.
At the moment, all our packs are buy one get one free using the code ROSSAMORE at checkout. And there's also a couple of free packs if you just want to try something out. And if you're into sampling and want someone to share your flips, samples, or get feedback, we've got a Discord full of producers and friendly
I got them more than I got last time.
All the links for those are in the description. Not content with their work with the SP-12, the EMU team got to work on upgrading it.
What people were telling us is we want more memory, we want more of our own sounds. So we eventually expanded that to the SP-1200, and what we did then was take out all the ROM and make it all RAM and put a little disk drive on it. And what we saw people starting to do is sample not drum sounds, but instrumental loop.
If people thought the SP-12 was a game changer, then the SP-1200 took sampling into a whole new stratosphere.
By the time the SP-1200 came, I was kind of like trying to get in the record industry.
Y'all saw the show when he wanted to try to steal it, but he still got it.
Probably 17, 18 years old. And the SP-1200 was like the dream.
Bought the floor model.
Marley user, you keep hearing about this thing. And so I was able to rent one. So I rented it, but I ain't take it back.
The SP-1200 gave you longer sample time per sound, more accessible banks, and just enough memory to grab the full bars instead of stitching together fragments. And producers were forever finding ways to stretch it to its limit.
Keep in mind, no time stretching like it is today. Let's say we're on an SP-1200 where you're only getting 2.5 seconds per pad. How do I get something that's 2 measures long into that? I have to speed it up. Sometimes we'll run it up to 78, then bring it in and then pitch it down. This is where you get that grungy kind of dark-ish, all the artifacts are stretching and things of that nature. And that to me gave the character, gave it soul.
And then there were the happy accidents.
Another thing that we've also discovered by using that same machine was basically called filtering. It was something that we had to find out by trial and error. One of the errors that we found out is that if you take that mix out output and you put the plug in halfway, it filters the sound. So you get this filtered kind of like, and then you get another sound with it bright. So that this way it just allows you a little more control over the sample.
By the late 80s and early 90s, the SP-1200 was everywhere. Public Enemies, It Takes a Nation of Millions. Nas's Illmatic. Big Daddy Kane's Long Live the Kane. They want to get some, but I'm the Kane, so yo, you know the outcome, another victory. And so many more. And throughout it all, you had producers passing on their secrets to the next generation. Paul C to Large Professor.
He was a wizard on the SP-1200. People would just go in the studio and jaws dropping because he was just so swift with it and just knew what he wanted to do. And the beats would be so funky.
And Large Professor to DJ Premier.
Large Professor taught me things that got me to another level. The way he's truncate beats, he was like, and he was doing it almost like he was doing a magic trick. And I would just stare at him just like, damn, how do you do that? He taught me how to take it to that level.
And the cycle continued. What EMU created unintentionally was a machine that helped define a genre. When Dave Rossum sat down with the EMU team to work on the SP, they had no idea the impact it would have.
The love that folks have for that instrument and that sound, that's why I do this sort of thing. I hand it off to a musician and they can express themselves in a way that they haven't been able to do before.
And the legacy the machine has built over time is clear to see.
I think that little part that I played in the hip-hop movement is the thing that I'm most proud of. My instruments inspiring musicians. There's nothing that is a greater reward to somebody than to have somebody embrace it and then do something.
The fact that he embraces that is awesome as well too. You know, he could like feel indifferent about it, but he did.
Pete Rock put it best when he said,
I don't care what's new out, there's no better machine in the music industry.
And if you want to see more stories like this,
still use it,
including a deep dive into the Roland TR-808, check out our Behind the Record series in the playlist on the screen.
Easy More B, I think, what's the other one from DMX? Dame Grease, they still use it. But yeah, other than that, this was like a good look into one of the most iconic, another good look, because I did reaction videos to a lot of things. Shout out to boy Direct Production too. A good look into the iconic SP-1200 though. Definitely shaped the game as well too. So other than that, if you like my reaction, like, share, subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's your boy T-Bird signing off. One love.